Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Today, it's just me, so I'm going to do something a little bit different. Brad, Tyler, the team, they're all working super hard, and I'm going to get about 30 minutes in here between meetings, between events, between things going on, between pen testing, to break down a topic that I spoke about actually today, or I guess yesterday, depending when you listen to this, on the PDQ live stream. So this episode is going to be about pen testing on a budget for IT admins. So this is specific for IT admins, IT managers, IT folks who want to do some security stuff in their environment, but they're not exactly sure where to start. I'm going to talk about tools that you can use, free tools that you can use in your environment to find these security issues and misconfigurations. I'm going to talk about free resources like webinars and podcasts and blogs and additional resources where you can learn more about this stuff. And I'm going to share just a little bit from a methodology standpoint, what you can do in Active Directory as far as security goes, like how you can actually find some of this low-hanging fruit. And then I'm going to talk about Windows security low-hanging fruit and kind of a checklist methodology, if you will, low-hanging fruit for that as well. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm going to get right into it. So first off, what are the free tools, right? So if you're a listener to this podcast, you probably can guess what a lot of these are. I'm going to just rattle through them real quick, and then we're going to deep dive into these a little bit more to kind of give a little bit more context of how you can use them in your environment. All right, so tools. The first two that I always recommend folks kind of start out with is Ping Castle or Purple Knight or both. So Ping Castle is from a company called Netrix. Purple Knight is owned by Sempris. Both free tools, both community-driven tools. Super, super awesome. And the reason I like to start with those first is because those cast the widest net. Those tools find the most issues across the widest range of areas where things could possibly go wrong in Active Directory. So certificate services, group policies, accounts and passwords, all sorts of stuff. Ping Castle and Purple Knight have like 180 plus different rules for things that they check. And the cool thing is they check for a lot of the security stuff, but they also check for hygiene things. So like if the AD recycle bin is not enabled, or if you haven't rotated the KRB TGT password in a while. So a lot of low-hanging fruit, a lot of detailed issues that Ping Castle and Purple Knight can find. The next tool is Locksmith. Locksmith is a tool written by a friend of mine, Jake Hildreth, who's an awesome, awesome person just in his own right, but created a super awesome tool to find Active Directory certificate services misconfigurations. So these are misconfigurations to certificate templates, where users are able to enroll in templates that they shouldn't, or a lot of different types of issues. We're going to get into that a little bit more. The next is ADeleg and ADeleginator. So ADeleginator is a tool that I wrote. It's just a wrapper around a better tool called ADeleg. And ADeleg finds non-default, insecure, delegated permissions. So this is like, think for example, if you want to allow help desk to reset the passwords of accounts in your environment, but you don't want to just put them in domain admins, for example, well, you can use delegated permissions in Active Directory to do that. So ADeleg, and by extension ADeleginator, the tool that I wrote, can go out to Active Directory and it'll find all those insecure permissions and then display them. So super, super cool. The next is Script Sentry. Again, a tool that I wrote, but when looking at Ping Castle and Purple Knight reports, I noticed that there was a lot of these logon script issues. So I did a bunch of research a couple years ago and I released a tool that finds all these different variants for logon script issues. And I think at the time when I did this research, there were like 9 different issues that you could possibly run into with logon scripts. And coincidentally, just this week on the pen test that I'm doing, I'm seeing some of the logon script issues that I researched a couple years ago. So this stuff still happens. So that's a great tool for that. Power Hunt Shares. This is for identifying insecure share permissions. Super, super cool. Definitely recommend checking it out by the folks at NetSpy. Credential Discovery. So I have a couple scripts that I use for credential discovery, PowerShell scripts, and I'll have a link somewhere to you guys can access all of these things. So real quick, by the way, just like to interject my own self here. I have a Notion page that has all of these tools, links to all the resources, a link to like my quick playbook, like methodology checklist, if you will, all the low-hanging fruit to kind of look for. I have that in a Notion page. So I'm going to put that in the description of this episode. So wherever you're looking for the, listening or watching this episode, go to the description of YouTube or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this, or go to offsec.blog and go and find the resources section for this Notion page. The link is go.spenceralessi.com/budget. So go.spenceralessi.com/budget to get that checklist, methodology, tool list thing, and a link will be in the description. So I have credential discovery scripts, and then the last thing is App Locker Inspector, which is another tool that I wrote just this year that looks for insecure App Locker rules or misconfigurations within App Locker. All right, so we talked about some of the tools for AD security. Now I want to go through kind of a methodology of like, if you're just starting out, what should you do, right? First thing, selfishly, is like watch the webinars that I've done because I lay out a lot of this stuff and I go into a lot more detail in those webinars. So two that I would kind of look at, pay attention to are my AD permissions webinar. And the name of that is Silent But Deadly, the Stinky Truth About Active Directory Permissions. In that webinar, I talk about misconfigured permissions, how they happen, what to look for, and how you can find them with a lot of the tools that I mentioned. So that webinar recording will also be in that Notion page. There'll be a link for it. You can just go click on it and watch it. The next one is how to harden Active Directory to prevent cyber attacks. It's another webinar I did. I think I did that one 2 years ago, maybe. I'll have to refresh that one, but that's another webinar that I did about that's solely focused on hardening Active Directory. So stuff like using laps to make sure all your local admin passwords are unique, checking your file shares for credentials, a lot of things I laid out. I laid a roadmap for hardening Active Directory in that webinar. So there'll be a link. You go check that out as well. So watch those webinars. The next thing is to find low-hanging fruit in Active Directory. So run Ping Castle, run Purple Knight, run Locksmith, run some of the tools that I mentioned, and you're going to get a good sense. You're going to get a lot of immediate visibility into risky objects in Active Directory, insecure delegations or insecure permissions, maybe misconfigured certificate templates or logon scripts, and a whole bunch of dangerous, security issues and misconfigs. So go out, find all that low-hanging fruit. Next, you're going to find the low-hanging fruit in Windows. So a lot of organizations have Windows across their endpoints. So Windows 11, hopefully no more Windows 10, maybe. I still have a few Windows 10, to be honest with you. Who am I kidding? So find low-hanging fruit on Windows. That's going to be things like insecure permissions for third-party applications. A lot of applications set up scheduled tasks, or they have services that are components of their software. And sometimes those can be misconfigured and allow like any user to modify those. So that could be pretty risky. Unattend.xml files can potentially have plain text credentials in them. I say plain text, they're actually base 64 encoded. So more or less plain text, if you will. So find Active Directory low-hanging fruit, find your Windows low-hanging fruit. And then the next part of the methodology here is testing security monitoring. So you want to test threat detection, your security monitoring capabilities, because the last thing you want to do is wait until you have an incident or you actually have malicious activity in your environment to put those tools through its paces. And the goal here really is to find out if something goes bump on your network, are you going to know about it, right? If there's a user that's downloading something they shouldn't, am I going to know about it? And the best time to know that is now. The second best time, or I guess the best time to know it was yesterday. The second best time is now, however that saying works. But test your security monitoring, your threat detection capabilities. I think of it like backups. Like if you don't test those things, you don't have that capability. So if you don't test your backups, if you don't test your recovery processes, you don't have backups, you have a hope, you have a wish, right? You have a dream. So test those things. So the number one recommended way I tell folks to do that is to go out to resources like the DFIR report. So that's the dfirreport.com. Again, links are going to be in the Notion page for this. But the DeFi report, Palo Alto, Mandiant, which is now part of Google, Microsoft, they all put out threat reports, right? And in those threat reports, they have TTPs, they have tools that threat actors ran. So I would encourage you to identify the threat actors that target your industry or your organization, your vertical, whatever. Identify the TTPs that they use, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and then capture some of that stuff, document it, collect some of the tools, and then run those things in your environment. Obviously, you want to be safe, and that goes without saying with like all of these tools. Make sure that you know what the tool does, read the source code, understand what the tool is going to do first before you run it in your environment. And then obviously you want to run it safely. Maybe spin up a VM that's kind of isolated or something like that you can spin down if you need to. But be smart about it. Go through a good process to kind of vet the tools before you actually go and run things. But run those threat intel sourced tools and techniques and procedures in your environment. Run them in a controlled manner, a safe way, but run them so you can see what gets alerted, what gets blocked, so you have that information and you can identify those gaps before it's kind of too late. And that's one of the things we do on our internal pen test is we have a dedicated section in our internal pen test report for this. We call it a mini purple team, and it's designed to say like we did these 20 things on the pen test, right? And 10 of them were blocked, 5 of them weren't. There was alerts. It was a high severity. It was CrowdStrike that blocked it, or was the identity product. So we have all of that laid out in a nice table to tell you exactly what we did and if it was observed, if it was alerted on, if it was blocked. And the reason is we want to give you a roadmap or kind of a guide or a journal of all the things that we did and what things you maybe need to work on in terms of threat detection, security monitoring. And you could take that back to your vendor, your MSP, your SOC, or your internal team and say, okay, we have visibility for all these things, but there's this stuff over here we didn't see. Maybe it was lateral movement. Maybe it was some credential dumping technique or whatever it is. It allows you to identify the things that you need to work on. So really, really valuable part of our internal pen test report. The next part of this like quick playbook methodology, I say quick, right? It's going to take a while, is to prioritize the fixes. So you're going to run all these tools, you're going to do all these things. The next step is to prioritize like what you fix, what you address first. And there's not necessarily a great way to identify, what is more important than other when you're first learning this stuff. You kind of have to do your own research. You kind of have to read the resources, the links that are provided in those reports. You got to do some research and some digging if you want to do this yourself to figure out, what is most important and what you should fix first. So with Pinkcastle, with Purple Knight, they all have resources that you can kind of click on and kind of do research on. But what you want to do is map the findings to business impact, to the issue severity, like the severity of the issue that you're looking at, and the cost / like impact of the remediation, right? If something is really critical and it could be really disruptive, to the environment, maybe that's not the first thing you do first, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but maybe there's some low-hanging fruit that is still pretty severe. Maybe it's high, medium level severity. Like it could definitely cause some harm if somebody abused it, but the impact to the environment in terms of like remediation of like taking systems down or being complicated, maybe that's pretty low. So maybe you can address those things, like those 20 things right out of the gate and get those fixed while you're kind of working on those larger initiatives, So prioritize all the results that you get into some format that makes sense and target 3 to 5, maybe 10 things that you can meaningfully address or fix in the short term. And then identify some of the things that are you're going to take a while. They're bigger projects. They're going to cause more disruption, more moving parts and pieces. Identify those as well, but make sure you track those and keep an eye on them. So that's the last part of this kind of quick methodology is prioritize the fixes. So the next 2 sections I want to talk about before I wrap up is Windows security low-hanging fruit and Active Directory security low-hanging fruit. So in this section, I'm going to talk about, what are some of the things to look for when you're evaluating a Windows device? And what are some of the things to look for when you're evaluating Active Directory, specifically for your security related issues? All right, so Windows. So Windows, I'm going to talk, I did a webinar on this, common misconfigurations in Windows that I see during internal pen tests. A link to the recording of the slides, again, is in the Notion. It's go.spencerlc.com/budget, and all the links are there to all this stuff. So Windows security issues. Here's some of the most common Windows misconfigurations that I see on internal pen tests. First one is unattend.xml files. I mentioned that earlier. Unattend.xml files are Microsoft deployment files. You can configure these files to do certain things when you image a machine, including setting up a local admin account. And you can specify a password in those. It's actually base64 encoded, which means you can just decode it and read the plain text password if it's in there. This is, I don't see this all the time, but it's common enough to bring it up and mention it. So the fix there is to purge the credentials and make sure that those are cleaned up, and make sure to use Laps. Laps is a free tool that randomizes the local admin password in Windows. It's managed all by Active Directory or Intune if you use the newer version, and it's super, super great. The next is cleaning up, users who have local admin rights. So we see this from time to time where domain users or just the user that is using that machine has local admin rights. The reason this is risky is, threat actors with local admin rights could disable the endpoint security products. They could install their own tools. They could do any number of things with local admin rights. So pretty risky there. I talked a little bit about reuse local admin passwords. Again, using Laps is a great fix for this, a mitigation. There are other commercial tools you can use, but Laps is free. It's built in, so why not? The last couple are insecure tasks and services. So this might be the case where you install a third-party product, and that third-party product creates a service, and that service runs as some level of authority on that system. Well, if that software is misconfigured, maybe the permissions are misconfigured on that service, and it allows everybody to modify that service. Well, now I have, as a threat actor, a way to potentially elevate my privileges, kind of abuse the access to that machine. Another issue that I see with third-party software is it will add the path to this. It will add the path where it gets installed to the system path. So maybe it needs to call a binary to run, and rather than give the full path, you just put it in the system path, and then whenever you call it, wherever you are on the command line, it'll just reference that binary. The problem is, depending on how that's configured, it could again allow for privilege escalation. So definitely a dangerous one to look for as well. There's some more that I will put that I've put in the Notion page, so you can go check that out. So AD security, Active Directory security, low-hanging fruit. This is my favorite. This is what I learned and grew up on. This is kind of my bread and butter, if you will. So I'm most passionate about this section. So again, like I mentioned, run Pincastle and Purple Knight. It's great to get a baseline. They surface the most issues out of the gate. And the cool thing is they both give you scores, and you can take that score and you run it once, you fix a bunch of stuff, you run it again, and you do a little bit better, and you track that. You run it, you fix stuff, you run it again, you do a little bit better, scores a little bit better. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to track the changes over time and to show your IT manager, your CIO, your CEO, or whoever, hey, we're working on these things, we're tracking this stuff, we're getting better. And it shows that you're, being proactive, and it shows improvement in the security program. And that's the kind of thing that leadership like to see. They like to see that there's improvement being made. And Pincastle and Purple Knight allow you to track those scores and keep track of that over time, which is super handy. Next is permissions. So this is something I see wrong more often than not, is just delegated permissions, insecure permissions on Active Directory groups, on OUs, anywhere you can imagine in an Active Directory, we've probably seen insecure permissions. So the thing I recommend here is, obviously Pincastle, Purple Knight will find some of this stuff, but a deleg and a deleganator are kind of purpose built to find these kinds of issues. So run those tools, look for specifically where unsafe users have privileges over, privileged resources. And let me explain. Unsafe users are groups like domain users, authenticated users, everyone, or maybe even just like low privilege groups in your Active Directory. So maybe like the accounting group or faculty or something like that, that shouldn't have elevated rights. You want to look for where those groups have elevated rights on things like domain admins, the domain controllers owe you, the root of the domain, privileged tier 0 type resources. That's the first thing to look for. You want to identify the root cause, try to figure out, if like there's inheritance involved, like where these permissions came from, and then fix them there, fix them at the root and decide if you need those permissions, and make sure that you review that on a regular basis. All right. Next is certificate templates. So if you have Active Directory certificate services, you will likely have some misconfigurations in your ADCS environment. So this is where Locksmith really shines. Again, Pingcastle, Purple Knight can find some of these issues, but Locksmith hands down finds the most and is the most comprehensive at this. So run Locksmith in your environment, fix those misconfigured templates, fix the permissions issues that you find, and your environment, I promise you, will be much more secure after that. And it's not a lot to say about Locksmith other than run the tool and fix the issues. Especially if it's ESC1, ESC2, 3, 4, 5, like those are the big ones that can cause the most damage. So definitely pay attention to those. Now on to plain text credentials. So plain text credentials is something that we see all the time. This is on file shares, in SharePoint, in document repositories, in document management systems, right, with law firms. My recommendation is to do it manually at first. So use the Windows search, right, like Explorer box, and just go out to your share and search manually for password or login, whatever. And then once you kind of get comfortable, you've kind of eliminated some of the low-hanging fruit, you want to automate some of this, run some PowerShell foo, maybe use the scripts that I share in the Notion template that are free, by the way. Maybe run some of those on a regular basis and automate some of it. But definitely do this. I can promise you, I've gotten domain admin more times from just finding a credential on a share than just about any other kind of abuse there is in Active Directory. So definitely one to pay attention to. There's some other stuff in this AD section, the low-hanging fruit section, that you can check out if you want, like share permissions and logon scripts. But I'll save some of that for kind of, an exploration of the listener or watcher, or depending on where you're viewing this. Also in the Notion template, the Notion page, I have some example commands of things you can run. I have additional resources. So some of the stuff I want to make a shout out to that's been pretty instrumental for me in my career and just learning about Active Directory and security is adsecurity.org. That's Sean Metcalf's blog where he talks about Active Directory security topics. Anybody who does Active Directory administration and security maybe knows about it. If you don't, you should. Sean is a certified master in Active Directory and really, really knowledgeable about Active Directory security. He's kind of like the godfather of AD security, in my opinion, because he's been doing this and studying this and researching it and doing security assessments for longer than I think anybody that I know. So really, really awesome resource. That's adsecurity.org. Couple other shout outs are the Active Directory subreddit. So Poolman Jim, shout out to him, mod on the Active Directory subreddit. And I think maybe the person who created it, that subreddit, I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but he's got a wiki and like a resources section on this Active Directory subreddit for all of the things that I mentioned and even more, right? So ton of resources on that subreddit. So in the Notion page that I share, there are links to all this stuff. So I wanted to do a speed run of kind of Active Directory security stuff, resources for IT admins to kind of pen test their environment on a budget, if you will. So this was purpose built for that. The last thing I'll say, I'll just share again, if you want the Notion page with like the checklist and the methodology and a link to the tools and all the resources, you can find that in the description of wherever this episode is, or go to go.spenceralessi.com/budget. And I'm going to call this one short. I think we're like maybe 20, 25 minutes in, doing a quick speed run to get this episode out this week. Super appreciate everybody listening, watching, and sharing the show, talking about it, letting us know when you talk to us that you were a listener and that you got value from it. Super appreciate it. And you can check us out on offsec.blog, secureIT360.com if you want a pen test from us. And with that, we'll see you in the next episode.